General Hospital will reveal it wasn't just the betrayal that broke Liz, it was something far deeper, something far more unsettling than simply being on opposite sides of a moral dilemma. What truly rattled her to the core was the realization that the man she once loved, the father of her child, was no longer anchored in the same principles they used to share. The Lucky she knew had always wrestled with the burden of justice, had always carried the weight of doing what was right, even when it cost him dearly. But now, watching him twist truth into justification, shielding Kristina despite the devastating harm she caused, Liz was forced to confront a painful truth: Lucky had crossed an invisible threshold. The lines between right and wrong, once so clear to him, had been blurred beyond recognition. His loyalty had become blind, his judgment warped. And the deeper he sunk into the mire of secrets and misplaced protection, the more unstable he became. And with that instability came danger, not just the physical kind, but the kind that infiltrates a home, corrodes trust, and destabilizes everything that once felt safe. For Liz, it awoke a fear more chilling than any threat Ava Jerome could conjure. It was the fear of living beside a man who could no longer tell light from darkness. Things came to a head when Ava, ruthless and calculating as ever, discovered Lucky's interference in her carefully constructed extortion scheme against Alexis. For Ava, this wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an insult. It was a direct challenge to her dominance. A slap in the face that she could never tolerate. Ava wasn't known for her mercy, and she certainly wasn't about to start now. What followed wasn't just retaliation, it was a slow, methodical unraveling of Lucky's life. It began subtly, anonymous phone calls that ended in silence, cryptic messages slipped under his door, and whispers in dark corners about his past and his perceived loyalties. But it didn't stop there. Soon, the threats took on a more insidious form. Lucky's car brakes failed on a quiet night drive. A brick crashed through the window of his apartment, narrowly missing his son's playpen. Reporters began hounding him, fueled by tips from anonymous sources, all hinting at alleged misconduct in former cases. His name, once respected in law enforcement circles, became tarnished, whispered with suspicion. Ava was orchestrating it all. A maestro of vengeance, and Lucky was the instrument through which she played her symphony of retribution. Each note, each calculated strike, chipped away at his credibility, his safety, his peace of mind. Liz watched the disintegration unfold with a growing sense of dread. She had once stood by Lucky through addiction, through trauma, through the firestorms of heartbreak. But this was different. He wasn't just a man broken by circumstance. He had become a man who refused to be saved. He clung to his own version of righteousness, defending Kristina at all costs, ignoring the mounting consequences, disregarding the risks to their child, to Liz, to himself. His refusal to step away from the fire, even as it consumed everything around him, became the final signal Liz needed. Her heart was torn, but her instinct to survive, to protect herself and her child, was louder. So, she walked away. Not because the love had died, but because love alone wasn't enough. She couldn't tether herself to a man who had become a liability to everything she held dear. She couldn't afford to gamble her future, or that of her children, on a man who saw nobility in self-destruction. And in leaving Lucky, Liz didn't just make a choice for peace, she made a declaration of strength. That even in the ruins of something once beautiful, she would not be a casualty of another person's descent. She would not stand silently while the darkness claimed him. And as Ava's campaign of retaliation raged on, Liz's decision stood firm like a beacon, a final act of reclaiming the safety, the sanity, and the dignity that Ava and Lucky had both, in their own ways, threatened to strip from her. Liz had once placed unshakable faith in Lucky. To her, he wasn't just a man she had loved, he was a moral compass, someone who, even in the darkest moments of his life, had always fought to do the right thing. He was the man who struggled with guilt, who wrestled with justice, who tried to rise above his own demons to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That was the man Liz trusted, the man she thought would never allow emotion to override his sense of right and wrong. But that faith began to erode the moment she realized he was quietly helping Kristina, the very woman responsible for the horrific car sabotage that nearly ended Liz's life. The betrayal hit Liz on multiple levels. She wasn't just stunned by Lucky's involvement, she was shattered by the moral blindness that had taken over him. Kristina had orchestrated an attack that could have killed her, and instead of standing with her, Lucky had chosen to shield the perpetrator. At first, Liz confronted him with urgency, hoping her words, her tears, her pleas would awaken the man she once knew. She reminded him of their shared values, of the importance of accountability, of the dangers in turning a blind eye to criminal behavior, especially from someone like Kristina, whose privileged ties had always granted her undeserved immunity. But Lucky, stubborn and resolute, refused to listen. His guilt over Kristina's troubled past, coupled with his misguided sense of loyalty to Alexis, had warped his judgment. He became consumed with protecting Kristina at all costs. Even if it meant suppressing evidence, obstructing justice, and putting Liz in harm's way again. He dismissed the reality of what Kristina had done, rationalizing it as a mistake rather than an attempted crime. In doing so, he not only undermined Liz's trauma but made it clear that her safety came second to his misplaced devotion. That realization marked the moment Liz began to detach emotionally, the slow unraveling of the love and respect she had once held so fiercely. Meanwhile, Kristina remained ominously silent. She did not confess, nor did she express remorse. What she felt was not guilt, but fear, fear of exposure, fear of losing the safety net her family had always provided. Fear of facing real consequences for the first time in her life. Yet even that fear did not translate into accountability. Instead, she continued to hide behind the people willing to protect her, allowing Lucky to become a human shield against the justice she so deeply deserved. What made the situation even more volatile was the shadowy presence of Ava, who had initially only sought to exploit Alexis for financial gain. But as the extortion plot deepened, so did the complications. Rick entered the scene not as a mere accomplice, but as an architect of chaos. Rick wasn't just manipulative, he was a master of puppetry. With Ava as his front, he manipulated everyone around him like pieces on a chessboard, orchestrating a game that none of them fully understood. He knew how to exploit weaknesses, how to turn fear into compliance, and how to keep everyone indebted to him, whether through favors, threats, or silent leverage. Ava, intoxicated by the power and money flowing her way, failed to recognize the trap Rick was laying beneath her feet. Her arrogance blinded her to the warning signs, the way Rick spoke less like a partner and more like a handler. The way their plan began veering from financial pressure to full-blown psychological warfare. She thought she was in control, that her charm and ruthlessness made her untouchable. But in truth, her greed had placed her squarely in Rick's crosshairs. What had started as a scheme for control was quickly spiraling into something darker, more dangerous, a power play that neither Ava nor Kristina was truly prepared for. And amid this growing storm, Liz stood alone, betrayed by Lucky, haunted by near death, and forced to navigate a world where justice was malleable and morality had become selective. Each day she saw more clearly that Lucky was no longer the man she once believed in. His actions weren't guided by conscience anymore, but by emotion, fear, and misplaced duty. He had abandoned truth to protect a lie, and in doing so, had sacrificed the very foundation of their relationship. The woman Liz had become, strong, vigilant, fiercely protective, could no longer afford to cling to the past. As Kristina hid behind privilege and Ava barreled blindly toward self-destruction, Liz made a choice not to be dragged into the wreckage. She would not allow her son to grow up watching his father compromise everything for someone else's sins. She would not stay silent while her own pain was swept under the rug. And most importantly, She would not share a life with a man who no longer recognized the difference between justice and betrayal. At the same time, Spinelli, leveraging his unparalleled skills in surveillance, data mining, and digital forensics, had come dangerously close to uncovering the single piece of evidence that could have shattered the entire cover-up. The very car Kristina had sabotaged and used in the deliberate crash. This vehicle, a silent witness to the crime, held everything: fingerprints, traces of tampering, GPS data, and forensic residue that could undeniably link Kristina to the attempted murder of Liz. For weeks, Spinelli had operated under the radar, tracking down leads, analyzing metadata, and decoding encrypted communications. His breakthrough came after triangulating location pings from Kristina's burner phone and matching them to a storage facility outside of town. The car was there, or so he thought. But just as Alexis was preparing to act on Spinelli's findings, the vehicle vanished without a trace. No surveillance footage, no paper trail, no sign of forced entry. It was as if the car had never been there at all. The investigation, which had finally begun to take shape, suddenly collapsed into a void of silence and ambiguity. The momentum was lost, and the evidence, so vital, so close, slipped through their fingers. What should have been a pivotal moment became a crippling setback, and for Spinelli, it was a wake-up call. The disappearance wasn't random. Someone with significant power and influence had intervened. The deeper Spinelli dug, the clearer it became. There was a force at play far more dangerous and elusive than Ava. Patterns emerged in deleted surveillance records, in fake identities tied to shell companies, in encrypted messages that couldn't have originated from Ava's known associates. Someone was watching them, anticipating their moves, cleaning up loose ends before they could be tied. And the more he unraveled, the more it appeared that Kristina was no longer the one pulling strings. She was no longer the shadow lurking in the background. She was the marionette. And someone else, someone far more insidious, was controlling the stage. That someone, Spinelli feared, could be none other than Alexis herself. For Alexis, the moral line had always been a delicate one, clearly defined in theory, but blurred in execution when it came to her daughters. She had built a career on truth and justice, a reputation on ethics and logic. But as a mother, her instincts betrayed her ideals. With Kristina at risk of public ruin or incarceration, Alexis began making choices that she had once sworn she would never entertain. She reached out to allies from her days as a Cassadine attorney, reconnected with informants and former clients from Port Charles's underworld. In doing so, she crossed a boundary she could never uncross. The emotional torment of having to choose between her child and her conscience tore at her from within. Every move she made to shield Kristina from consequences pushed her further into a world of secrecy and compromise. Each favor she called in, each file she buried, each threat she ignored, only compounded the guilt gnawing at her soul. Ava, sensing the tides shifting and her grip on the situation weakening, began lashing out in desperation. Her usual charm and cunning gave way to volatility. She ramped up her intimidation tactics, silenced potential witnesses, and threatened former allies into submission. But the cracks were starting to show. Journalists began publishing damning leaks about Ava's role in the extortion plot. And whispers about Rick's double dealings began making their way through courthouse hallways and police briefings. Secrets that Ava and Rick had spent months burying were now seeping into the public sphere, destabilizing their alliance and leaving them increasingly paranoid. The controlled operation they had once orchestrated so precisely was now imploding from within. And caught in the heart of this maelstrom was Lucky, a man who had once believed that compassion and patience could guide Kristina back to redemption. He had convinced himself that by protecting her, he was doing the noble thing. That by silencing Liz's accusations, by destroying evidence, by taking Ava's threats on the chin, he was preserving some greater balance. But as everything unraveled around him, the truth became undeniable: he had been used. His loyalty had been exploited, his love for Kristina weaponized. His presence reduced to that of a pawn in a much larger, colder game. He wasn't the savior, he was collateral. Betrayed by the very people he had defended. Psychologically battered by Ava's campaign of revenge, and emotionally devastated by Liz's departure, Lucky found himself standing at the edge of total ruin. Everything he had once valued, his career, his relationships, his purpose, had crumbled under the weight of his misguided choices. And yet, amid the wreckage, he felt a flicker of clarity. For the first time in months, the noise faded. There were no more excuses to make, no more truths to deny. He had lost Liz not because she stopped loving him, but because he had stopped loving himself enough to know when to walk away from something toxic. So, he left Port Charles. Not in disgrace, and not in anger, but in quiet surrender. He packed his few remaining belongings, made no announcements, and disappeared into the night. Not to run, but to rebuild. Somewhere far from the chaos, far from the political entanglements. The betrayals, the manipulations. Somewhere he could remember who he was before everything went wrong. It was not a clean ending, there were too many wounds, too many unresolved stories left behind. But it was a beginning. For Lucky, it was the first step toward healing, even if the road ahead was long and uncertain. And for those left in Port Charles, his absence was more than a loss, it was a reminder that even the strongest hearts can shatter when tested by the darkest truths. Liz, though consumed by heartbreak and disillusionment, refused to allow pain to compromise her principles. She had been brought to the edge of despair, abandoned emotionally by the man she once trusted, and nearly killed by the reckless act of another. But instead of succumbing to bitterness, Liz chose clarity. She understood that survival, true, lasting survival, required strength not just in body, but in mind and heart. She took deliberate steps to reclaim her sense of self, carving out space to breathe, to reflect, and to begin healing from the layers of betrayal that had nearly destroyed her spirit. The road was not easy. Memories of her near-death experience haunted her nights, while thoughts of Lucky's downward spiral lingered like a ghost in her daily life. Yet through it all, Liz remained steadfast. Her greatest priority became her son. She understood all too well the dangers that Kristina and Ava's chaos could bring into their lives. And she was determined to shield her child from that toxic storm. No longer willing to wait on justice to intervene or on Lucky to come to his senses, Liz took control. She tightened the boundaries of her world, cut off toxic connections, and reached out to those she could trust. She enrolled in therapy, joined support groups, and slowly rebuilt a new sense of normalcy, a world where her son could thrive in safety, and where her own soul could finally breathe again.